car crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Welcome to The Attorneys. I'm Art Franklin. On this episode of The Attorneys, we are talking about the world of probate law, focusing, though, on trust. We're going to get into that and a lot more, but first I want to let you know that right now you can give a call to Hollis Wright at 1-844-LAW-TALK. That's 1-844-LAW-TALK. An attorney standing by right now to take your call. It is a free call. It is a confidential call. We like to tell you that at the very beginning of the show because they'll be manning those phones throughout the show, so you get a chance to reach someone there. Josh Wright, of course, is the managing partner at Hollis Wright, and we've got with us Christian Waters Sullivan. So glad to have you with us on the show.
So glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to have you on. And honestly, I want to learn a little bit about your practice. I want the folks that are listening, I know we're going to be talking today about probate, but kind of focusing a little bit more on the trust side of probate. Tell us just a little bit about your practice, your background as a lawyer, and we're so excited to have you on.
Sure. Well, like I said, I'm happy to be here as well. I have a small law firm located right here in downtown Birmingham. And we focus exclusively on anything having to do with trust and estates. So anywhere from estate planning to probate, estate and trust litigation, we kind of cover the gamut there.
And, you know, I have seen kind of an uptick over the last several years on estate litigation. Have you seen that same trend?
I have.
What do you think is driving that?
You know, and I'm not sure if this is still accurate, but a couple of years ago, the American Bar Association said it was the fastest growing area of litigation. So I think that, you know, we have an aging population. Yeah. So unfortunately, that just means more people are dying. Yeah. And we have a rise in some of the tools that we'll talk about today, trust and things like that. And so people, I think, are a little bit more aware of what their rights are and of all of these different tools that they can use for estate planning and a little bit more engaged in the process. Sometimes
lawyers know from the time that they're in college and about to go to law school what they're going to do in the practice. Sometimes it happens organically as you work your way into your practice. How did this happen for you to get into estates and trust? Because you know as well as I do, this is a significant specialty. There are not a ton of lawyers that do what you do, and it's a very important area of the law. How did you get into this? How did it happen for you?
Well, I certainly did not plan on it. I sort of stumbled into it, and I tell law students a lot of times, don't get too laser focused on what you're going to do because, you know, be open to change. And so I started working for a firm that was doing this kind of work, that was doing a significant amount of probate work, and, you know, really just had dived into that world. And so a couple years in, I said, well, I looked around at a lot of the lawyers who were doing this, I thought, well, in the city. And they all had a tax degree as well. So I decided a couple years in to go back to school and get my LLM, which is a Master's of Law in Tax, so that I could really focus on the estate planning portion of it and trust in particular. You know, that's really helpful for. So yeah, I kind of stumbled into the field.
So this is, when you hear LLM, that's like top of the class stuff. She's there, which is good.
And while you said that you didn't plan on it at the beginning, but what you do requires a whole lot of planning.
That's right.
How do you get started?
So to get started in estate planning, you got to pick up the phone and call a lawyer, right? There are a lot of services out there right now, free wills that you can do online. And, you know, unfortunately, that's what leads a lot to the rise in the estate litigation. We see a lot of homemade and internet-made wills that really cause a lot of problems. They cause more problems than they solve quite often. And so I would highly recommend speaking to a lawyer, pick up the phone and call somebody who specializes in this area of the law and talk through it. I think that people think it's a really overwhelming process. It's going to be really invasive and really difficult. We really try to make it as easy as possible. You know, we're going to try to do all of the legwork for you so that it's more like sitting down and having a conversation than it is a lot of paperwork and signing your life away.
And I was going to ask you that. When someone comes to see you about this, are you primarily learning about, hey, tell me about your family, tell me about your kids, tell me about your desires, what's your long-term plan on retirement? Like, are you gathering information for the most part?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that first meeting, we sit down, and I always tell my clients, we're going to divide this into 3 sections. In the first part, I just want to get to know a little bit about you. You know, what does your family look like? Are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? Then we're going to talk about your assets. You know, do we've got life insurance? Do we have a retirement plan? All of those things. And then what are our goals? You know, and how are we going to reach those? So what are we going to use from this information to carry out what your plan is? And the really great thing about estate planning and trust in particular is it's really customizable. So I like to know about your family and know what you want, because everybody has different goals and different values, and so we want to make sure that it's really tailored to the client.
Well, and that really is the issue, I think, which is tailored to the client. Every one of these is individual-based art, and you've just got to make sure that you're customizing this for each family and each individual.
Yeah, it's unique to every person. That's why you probably shouldn't go out there and do this online stuff and actually get a lawyer to take care of things for you. What about protecting your assets when you're planning your trust or your estate?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk through, we want to know about all of your assets. We want to know where your bank accounts are. We want to know about your retirement plans and your life insurance and your house and what your investments are. And there are a lot of things that we can do in advance to protect your assets for your family after death. There are certain types of trusts that can protect your assets during your lifetime. Much more common are the types of trusts that protect your assets after death. We use that one a whole lot in estate planning, those types of trusts. And a lot of that is making sure your kids are protected, making sure your spouse is protected, or the people that you care about in life, that those assets are shielded from creditors or somebody that may want to take advantage of them.
You raise a great point. I was actually going to ask this question of you. I hear a lot people say, I am concerned at my passing, my creditors are going to take everything I've ever earned. And there are ways around that, like beneficiary-based distributions,
That's right.
Trust documents, life insurance, joint tenancy on homes. Those are all part of the things that you do from a plan perspective, are they not?
Absolutely they are, yes. We want to go through all of those assets and make sure that we have a clear understanding of how things are owned. Are they jointly owned? Do we have beneficiaries listed? Do we have a payable on death provision? Because those things are really important in kind of funneling or channeling your assets to where you want them to be and to protect them.
This is so important, and I'm so glad that we have this topic, because the reality is, I'll give you a very simple story. I have a recent death case where someone had a 401k and they had very few assets, but the one thing they did not do is the beneficiary distribution on the 401k. And the 401k ultimately hit the estate, and the estate had some debt with cars and a mortgage and some other things. And unfortunately, because that person had not done great planning, don't get me wrong, we did fine on the wrongful death case to be able to help the family. But I felt terrible about that, because I was like, man, that person could have so easily done that as a beneficiary distribution and kept it away from creditors if they had just done it right, meeting someone like you. So anyways, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how the LLM works its way and the tax considerations work its way into trust documents, because that is an important combination between the two.
Important conversation, so don't go anywhere as we explore this whole topic of probate law. And guess what? We're just getting started. Also want to remind you that there's a QR code on the screen. Scan that QR code and you will reach someone at Hollis Wright. Attorneys are standing by throughout this call, and we like to hear from you, just like we like having you here watching the show. Stick around. We got more probate law here on The Attorneys when we come back.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
The Attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show in 2011, my goal was to do what our firm does best. Help people answer questions related to real-world legal issues they have in their lives in a way that's not intimidating to talk with a lawyer. If the issue is important to you, it's equally important to us, and we're ready to talk with you at no cost.
Yeah, oftentimes people are confronting various legal issues in their lives that really run the gamut of a lot of different legal practice areas such as bankruptcy, criminal law, civil law such as personal injury, divorces, domestic relations. And to be able to have a show once a week that covers those practice areas and answers people's questions in those areas, that's really the main objective of the show.
We use the resources of the many lawyers at our law firm to create a plan that has a lasting impact for each person that calls or texts. And we also give back to the community at the same time. We are here to serve you, the viewer, each week on The Attorneys.
The greatest stories are comeback stories. If you've been injured, Hollis Wright is here to tell yours. Let us be the author of your story and start by making one call to our attorneys. Let Hollis Wright tell your comeback story.
Welcome back to The Attorneys as we discuss probate law, doing everything we can to give you information on protecting your assets and making sure your loved ones are taken care of. And we've come back talking about this. This is one of those topics that has so many different layers to it.
Well, and not only that, it applies to everybody. It applies to people that are the baby boomers who are getting to the age where they're going to pass away, and the people our age who are managing and helping take care of them. And so it really it implicates everybody. Talk with me a little bit about, like, when you went back to go get your tax degree. Very small segment of lawyers actually do that. Generally, I've found the smartest of the lawyers, so that's a compliment. But tell me a little bit about how that is used in trusts when you set these trusts up.
Sure, yeah. So, tax planning, when you get a tax degree, I didn't really focus on the business part of things. I really wanted to focus on the estate planning part of tax. So it's a big part of what the law is about, what can be, what creditors can attach to after your death and things like that. But a lot of times, you hear people say, "Well, I don't want to have to pay the death tax, or the estate tax." And so we make sure that we counsel our clients on that, and we keep abreast of what the tax laws are. Right now, the exemptions are really, really high, as you may know. So it doesn't affect a whole lot of people, but we want to make sure that we're keeping up to date with those laws, and so that you can gain the maximum benefit and pay the least amount of taxes. A lot of times we run into people who've gotten information, well, so-and-so says I should just go ahead and give my child my house. Well, that's, from a tax perspective, that's not a great idea, and so we are able to kind of talk through the long-term implications of some of those things.
And I would imagine things like stock, homes, the basis of what the value of that home is at the time that it's being provided to somebody has a major impact on whether they could pay tax down the road on it.
That's absolutely right. And one of the benefits of that is if something is transferred as a result of someone's death, then they get a step up in that basis. And so there's a huge tax benefit there.
How do you describe, you're sitting on an airplane, someone says, hey, I hear the word trust, but explain to me in layman terms what a trust really does for me. How do you answer that question? Because sometimes people get overwhelmed in the estate world thinking a will is not available for me, which is not true. Thinking a trust is a complicated term that I don't really understand what it does, but I hear it has benefits. How do you simplify that and, if you will, dummify it so that people understand what really a trust is? Because it's not all that complicated.
That's right. I think of a trust as a vessel. It is essentially, you can think of it as a bank account or just a big pot that assets can be put into. So a trust, different kinds of trusts can own different things, but it can own your home, it can own bank accounts. But essentially, it's a really customizable tool that we can use to ensure that your assets not only are protected, but then that they're distributed exactly how you want them to be. If we've got a will, the will may say, I want everything to go to my son. Well, a trust can say, I want everything to go to my son, but I want it to be protected until he's a certain age, and I want it to be able to provide for him to go to college or buy a car or make a down payment on a house. And a trust can really lay out all those terms and make sure that it's a plan for the future, and maybe he's not going to blow it all when he, turns 21.
Well, and that's a great example. But another thing, as Kristen was talking about, is you can carve certain assets that you have out and put them into a trust to make sure that those are divided different than the will itself, but also have good benefits and tax benefits to put it in there.
And I'm glad you talked about the difference between a trust and a will, because I think that's so important. So many people see them all as both of them as the same thing. What's the role of the trustee in all of this?
Yeah, so the trustee is a fiduciary. The trustee is responsible for making sure that the money or the assets are invested properly, that they're protected, and that they're used according to the terms of the trust. So essentially, the trustee just has to follow your instruction manual that you've laid out in this trust. So in the example I gave before, they would make sure that college tuition bill got paid, but they would make sure that maybe your son gets a practical car instead of a $100,000 car when he turns 16. So their role is to make sure that everything is passed according to your wishes and that the assets are protected.
What is this area, what are you seeing? Are you seeing that the area of estate planning has become more relevant in the legal world in the last 10 years? Or is it kind of the way it started at the beginning of your practice? What are you seeing trend-wise?
Well, I see a lot of questions about trust.
Okay.
That's one of the big things that we get. People hear kind of some buzzwords around that. There's some financial folks that talk about trust a lot. So we have a lot of interest in that, which I think is a really good thing, because when I first started practicing, I think that people felt like trusts were really only available, we hear the trust fund baby, if somebody has really, really high value assets. And I advise my clients that trust is a really good tool for lots of families, families that are right in the middle, and families of all sizes and values.
How does, as far as an executor of a will or a trustee, how does one go about, and how do you recommend that they go about selecting that person? Because that person has to have some objectivity to them that is not going to take sides. There are just some qualities of that person. How do you recommend people find them?
It's tough, naming all of the important people in your estate planning. So your executor, trustee, God forbid, a guardian for minor children, those things are really difficult decisions. But you want to look to your inner circle, your trusted friends and family, although not all of us have somebody in our family that is able to be trusted with that, or that's available to take on that responsibility. So that there are also professional trustees, there are institutions, banks and other financial institutions that provide those services. So it's really a case-specific thing, where that's part of that conversation where we sit down and talk through all of those roles and who would be best suited for that.
We're getting ready to go to a commercial break, I know. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how trust can be used to make sure after someone's passing that certain assets are properly invested so they can grow for the benefit of your children, as an example. I want to talk a little bit about that, as it can be an investment vehicle too.
Okay, we'll do just that. I want you to go ahead and make sure that you follow Hollis Wright on all the social media platforms, on X, on Instagram, and on Facebook. Lots of good information throughout the week. And you know what? You can still reach an attorney at Hollis Wright right now. All you got to do is call 1-844-LAW-TALK. It is a free and confidential call, standing by to take your call right now. Stay with us as we're talking probates, trusts. We'll continue the conversation right after this.
Thank you for watching The Attorneys each Sunday night, where we come to your living room to provide free legal advice in a confidential, off-air setting. Unfortunately, with the number of calls, texts, and emails that come in during the show, we can't always get to everything. But know this, Hollis Wright is open all week long. You call us at 844-LAW-TALK and we're going to answer your question for free. Thank you for watching The Attorneys, and we look forward to seeing you and talking to you soon.
If you've been injured in an accident, you should never sign with a law firm without first speaking to an attorney at that firm. At Hollis Wright, you'll always speak with an attorney first. Call today and let Hollis Wright tell your comeback story.
Welcome back. Glad you are staying with us as we are discussing probate law. Also, don't want you to miss this last opportunity to reach someone at Hollis Wright. That number again, 1-844-LAW-TALK. You can reach someone there, and it is a free, confidential call. Josh, we've got this last segment to get into. So much that we've talked about already, but certainly want to wrap it up in this last segment.
All right, so Kristen, let's talk about this. I know that trusts are often used, for example, in my cases, when minors are left after a death case. We use public trusts or pooled trusts in order to make sure the children's money is properly invested and until they meet certain metrics like turn 19, finish college, turn 25, etc. I know in your world, when someone is pre-planning for their own family, the trust being an asset producer is actually a big kind of important component to it.
It absolutely is. So one of the biggest issues, biggest mistakes, honestly, that we see in estate planning is when an asset gets left out and is left to minor children. So we never want to give money directly to minor children because they can't receive it. And that includes having them as the beneficiary of your life insurance policy, your retirement plan, and anything else, a beneficiary in your will. So we want to make sure that all of those assets go into a trust for the child's benefit. The alternative to that is if children get that money outright, it has to go through the probate court and they have to set up a conservatorship. It's a very costly, lengthy, very invasive process. So a trust is a great tool to protect against that and to make sure that that money continues to grow.
What are some other pitfalls you see related to creation of trusts or failure to create a trust that can impact someone's estate?
Sure. A lot of times we see where a trust has been created and then nothing was ever assigned to the trust, or it wasn't properly assigned. So we want to make sure that we are updating our beneficiary designations, that we're distributing the assets that we need to, we're titling them or making them payable to the trust. That's a really big one. Failure to create a trust, of course, when there are minor children or when we have someone with a disability and then they are getting benefits outright and it threatens to impede their ability to receive government benefits that they're otherwise entitled to.
I've always kind of looked at trust too as a way to create incentives for your children if something should happen to mom and dad, to make sure that you have resources when it's time to go to college, that you do graduate from college, that you don't receive money until certain times in your life when you're mature enough to be able to make that decision. Same thing is true, though, I know, with children that are disabled or that may need a little more help than others. And so these are all great examples.
Great examples indeed. Something else that I think about. I know my wife and I have children from previous marriage, and in this day with blended families can get pretty complicated, can't you? So how do you figure things out with blended families?
It absolutely can. And that's where that really customizable aspect of a trust can come into play. So we can pull particular assets out. We can siphon them off into what we call sub-trust that may be treated differently than other things in the trust. It's a really good way to make sure that, the children are treated fairly, or everything goes exactly how, that's right, and everything goes exactly how you want it to go.
What do you see most often? Like, what do you use a trust as a vehicle, or as you mentioned earlier, kind of a vessel? What do you normally recommend? I know it's individualized per person and per family based on their resources and whatnot, but what is generally a process? Like, is it, hey, we're going to put all the cash in a trust, or all the stock in a trust, or a home in a trust? Like, what do you normally see?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do, and I'll tell you, our practice, we work with people of all stripes, but we have a lot of young families who are doing their planning. So maybe they've recently had children, or they're a blended family, recently got married, something like that. And so what we try to do is make sure that those trusts, that everything is exactly tailored to how they want it to be for their family. And so with the children, we may say, yes, we're going to go ahead and put the house in a trust. It may be we're going to put some small assets in the trust, and then everything's going to roll into that upon the death of one or both parents. If it's a blended family, maybe we're assigning part of the estate to the trust and part to the spouse. So it just really depends on the particular circumstance.
One other question I had is, do you recommend that if someone's going to do a trust, they also use the same attorney to do their will? Because I know there's a huge interplay between the two. Absolutely.
I think that you need a cohesive plan. That doesn't mean that if you already have a will, you can't go set up a trust, or vice versa. First of all, I think that a will and a trust, they're not mutually exclusive. If you have, everyone needs a will. And a lot of people also need a trust. But if you have a trust, you also need to have a will, at least here in Alabama. So I think doing it all at one time, because we really want to make sure that all of these moving parts are working well together.
So talk with us about this. I didn't mean to interrupt, because you may have had a question, but this is fascinating. What do you say to the person that says, hey, look, I'm just not wealthy enough. I don't make enough money to go talk with a trust lawyer. How do you answer that question to them?
I'll tell you, it's probably a lot cheaper than you think it is. Okay. And I think that, what is important to you? Is it important to you that the people you care about are taken care of, that the things that you've worked really hard for your whole life are passed on in the manner that you want them to be? Not having this in place can be much more costly down the road, and it can cost your family, the people that you love, an enormous amount of grief, an enormous amount of difficulty because of your lack of planning, unfortunately.
And, for what it's worth, going to someone that does this, like Kristen, consistently, where she already has trust documents she's drafted over and over again. She has forms that she can use to keep some legal costs down at times, too, depending on the family. Those are all important considerations. Great job, by the way. Absolutely. You did awesome. I'm so glad you came on.
So good to see you
So
guys.
glad.
That's Kristen Waters-Sullivan. Certainly appreciate it. And also appreciate you and joining us here on The Attorneys each and every week. Go ahead and also follow Hollis Wright on all the social media platforms, on X, on Instagram, and on Facebook. And make it a point to join us again next week here, same place, same time, for another episode of The Attorneys. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great one.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.